Okay, this lesson particularly for the Cornet project class, but also in application of target meet qualify, that quantified approach where we take 5 categories, 8 core elements, and apply it to the end of the age. It seemed to be something we've all heard about, even it's cross-sectional regardless of the political affiliation, the culture, the continent, or whether you are agnostic, gnostic, theist, atheist, religionist, or whatever. So this is primarily to achieve 2 ends in mind. First, how would we synthesize, take a full scope approach, or holistic as we were taught in hermeneutics by Dr. John Penn. We want to look for omissions. So let's look at our categories. I don't often just do this, but you can get graph paper and sit down. So theologian, for example, I chose Sir Robert Anderson as one. Then chronographer, Usher, he's the one who said the world was created October 23rd, 4004. He also taught to the day 6,000 years later to the day, so October 23rd, 1996, Christ would return or the world would end. However he described it, I haven't gone in and looked, but he did believe until the very day. So Robert Anderson noticed, he worked for Scotland Yard, so he was the one that noticed the 445 BC, March 14th, 314, and noticed that to the day, AD 32, April 6th, the triumphant entry of Christ. That's the decree to rebuild Jerusalem to the day of his triumphant entry. Now, one thing I did discover, a book written by a rabbi, that in the book of Daniel, after chapter, I think the first few chapters, probably 3 to 4, they omit the remaining chapters in this book written by a rabbi. Well, I'd read in one book, a history book from a Christian perspective, and they had noticed and said that this text by Judaizers is actually omitted or ignored. So when I found that book to validate, verify, I did it as any scientific method would encourage one to do. So I have both those books, the one that says that they've omitted it deliberately, and then the one that demonstrates it. You can also look at J. Sidlow Baxter's book, Explore the Book. Yeah. So you can look at Baxter, J. Sidlow Baxter's. And his book's called Explore the Book. So we talk about end of age, it fits real well. 8 columns. 5 categories: theologian, chronographer, mathematician. I chose Newton. He's known as someone who invented calculus. He also has several dates he targeted. One very interesting to me was 2060, the end of the world. History, we have the Israel Old Covenant community. They regathered in 1948, so there's a number. Of course, hermeneutics, the historical, grammatical, or lexical, syntactical. The key word here is how do you perform this analysis? What do we do when we are approaching language? Well, we're looking at numbers, and this is difficult because at this moment, we only have references to events that we all are codependent upon, dates and numbers, and then prophecies that this was quite credible when you notice that someone would go to that extent to omit that from their text because it showed to the day who Jesus is. So now that we have our numbers, we have this, we can include our text. As I was saying earlier, we're starting to really need to look for something. So in Psalm 90, we notice that our lifespan, or the time of our dying, as someone helped me recently recall, dying we will die, and that God reduced the dying process from 1,000 now down to, let's say, approximately 100, just to make the arithmetic easy. But in Psalm 90, it says that our lifespan is 70 years, with strength maybe 80. So if we take 80 with this, a generation, 80 years, let's say with strength, 80 years. So we add 80 to 1948, and we're looking at history. That's 2028. Yes, so 2028, then let's take Newton's number, 26. Now we're just using the numbers we have. We don't have to be inventors of data. And then we can take 1996, Usher's 1996, and you already see it now. And then we have 32. Well, you notice if you go back, this is exactly 32 years. And if you go forward, this is 32 years. Now, this is just using the numbers you have, because this is certainly not, as we hear people really lose their credibility and they go out and try to pick a day and whatever, but they can certainly arouse the interest of people, so much so that people throughout history have given up their careers, their lives, walked away to go, let's say, sit on a mountaintop and wait on the return of Jesus. But taking the 80 from Psalm 90 with strength, let's say, the 80-year span, taking a generation from 1948 and go 80 years forward, then we are seeing where the target somewhat forms. I've said this before. It starts to zero in. And I've even drawn, circles before just to show how this can be. It starts to all take a focus. Now, what do we do with that? Well, I'm not really sure, because my interest in it was to take what all is out there thus far. This was about Christ, and when he returned, you notice the knowledge of the scriptures that taught the Judaizers. They could know to the day it was he, and then proof today that contemporary Judaizers actually omit data from Daniel's prophecy to assure that there's no record that points, that is, no record that they are stewards of or custodians of, that would point to Christ as the one who is the true Messiah, because how do they explain then their rejection of him? So that data was very fascinating. This data here is based on, some have so much credibility with Usher that if you don't support his date, they will go so far as to say you don't believe the Bible. Now, the pastors at Landmark, where I was blessed to attend, were all educated at the seminary, and of course I would think my pastor, my former pastor, as extraordinary as a scholar as he is, and how well he did academically in the seminary, he would have found this about as easy as it is in reality. So it's not a challenge. It's not which side do you pick. This is about how do we put all this together and notice that we might have not seen 32. We might not have noticed 1996 because we may be arguing so fervently or emotionally here. And you can look this up, that he believed 6,000 years to the day. I know I was taught the imminence of Christ's return all my life, or early years of my life, and any moment he could return. And we were also told that we would never be here when there was a new world order. Of course, 1991, September 11th, George Bush, Sr. of the United States of America, stood up and said, we have a new world order. And just recently, one of the cabinet members or somebody for Joe Biden, President Biden, said we are looking at the liberal world order. So I'm here with New World Order being acknowledged by one president, then 10 years to the day with his son presiding as our president, George Bush Jr. We had the greatest calamity on the homeland, 9/11. And now I'm here, still here, when the current presidency and his cabinet members and officers say that we're talking about a liberal world order. And I was always taught we would never see that. So I started asking as long ago as the 80s, why are we still here? But someone told me it's attached to the tribulation. So that was difficult for me, because being with among people who believed in ages or dispensations, that meant that the 6,000 year history and then the rapture. Well, I thought, well, I know, but we were taught it was imminent, any minute, any time, any second. And I even knew people that altered their life behavior in light of the imminent return of Jesus. And we didn't distinguish rapture and return at that time. I just remember how disappointing it was when everything I was told we would never see in my lifetime. I think it was easier to say generations ago because no one could have possibly foreseen how quickly things change now and where we are today. It would really break the minds of people who were older then if they could have lived long enough now. Of course, for someone like me to have heard it all, now seen it all, this is just an easy way to pull all this together, to notice that someone who had the mind to invent calculus, someone who had the mind to date Bible events to the point that credible theologians today cite this as the creation date, and then someone as investigative in skills as Sir Robert Anderson of Scotland Yard noticed and worked that out. If he probably wasn't the first, but J. Sidlow Baxter Explorer the book referenced it. So you put all this together, and then you notice, because I was here at Landmark Jacksonville in 1988 when someone was distributing literature called 88 Reasons Why in 1988. And what they did, they took 40 years from the regathering of Israel, and they said 40 years was a generation. Well, then lately people have noticed, well, a generation could be 70 years, and then with strength it could be 80. So that pushed it out there to 2028. If you reduced it by 10, well, we're already past the 218. So it was just really interesting because this is just a good application, how you can apply this to any field, politics, religion. They commingle a lot, and you can notice that there's a lot more energy and excitement out there than the time invested. Someone said that people waste too much time thinking about the end of the world, and I challenged them. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, I disagree entirely. He said, why do you disagree? I said, well, they don't think about it. They emote about it, they talk about it, and then they just move on. And when it becomes, a moment of interest, they'll gather around it. But to sit down and use TMQ, pull together theologians, chronographer, mathematician, look at our history, remember your hermeneutics, focus on analysis, take a holistic approach, involve all of this, take the data we have in the Bible, for example, very prominent text there, and then just set it up and notice how do these numbers correlate and how do they complement or contradict or diminish. So I don't think anyone takes seriously the accuracy of this any longer. It's just, it appears that it has a strange symmetry here between the two. So you can enjoy this, just an example. Like I said, I took the time to go ahead and write down the categories. You can do a much more thorough job, and it's just, as Dr. Penn taught us, just sit down and take the time to bother. Always know you're probably missing something where we go into things with pre-understanding and we don't necessarily gather and pull all the data together. So just enjoy this study. I'll step back so you can see it and notice it. But this is, again, it's not a degree of difficulty. And what's effectual about this approach is what comes from it is you'll have a product greater than the sum of its parts. So enjoy this lesson.